And we're live. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today we're joined by Steve Winkel, Vice President of People and Culture at Inspira, and Amy's back again. Amy Leschke-Kahle is the Vice President of Performance Acceleration at the Buckingham Company. Welcome to the show, guys. How are you?
Amy?
Yeah, I'm great. Hey, Chris, how are you? We should have planned this better, right, Steve?
This happens like every single show. It's like, because it's virtual, I'm sure everyone listening right now doing virtual calls all over the world, it's like, who speaks first with virtual?
That's right.
Do I go? Do you go as well? But welcome, Steve. Steve, how are you getting on? How are you?
I cannot complain one bit. From a work and life perspective, things are good.
Nice. Amy, you're back again. You didn't get, I didn't scare you away last time.
No, it was close. I really debated if I should come back or not, Chris, but I'm here.
Fantastic. Oh, before we jump in, Steve, tell everyone a little bit about yourself personally and your journey to where we are today.
Sure. So one, again, thank you for having me. So to start my journey, I'll start about 20 years ago. I actually started this journey as a music major in vocal performance, and clearly have taken some sharp right turns and left turns along the way. Out of grad school, industrial psychology, became a salesperson, learned within 4 or 5 years that while I was good as a salesperson, I strongly disliked waking up in the morning as a salesperson. And so moved into operations, and the Cliff Notes version is that with that organization, I proposed, we're growing quickly. We're not scaling appropriately. We need a training program. I should lead it. And I was lucky enough to given that opportunity. And since then it's been a now 12, 13 year snowball in HR, which has been an awesome ride. So now I've landed for 3+ years now with Inspira. We're an experiential marketing group. So I'm fortunate enough to have about 300 people across the US that I'm helping to support the people strategy for.
Cool. Love that. And I love asking that question because it seems that after 300 episodes of the show, maybe 10 people chose a career in HR.
Yes, that is true.
Whereas you obviously, HR found you along the way, which is pretty cool. Remind everyone for yourself, Amy, as well. For those that missed the last show when you joined us, give a quick intro of yourself and your background.
Yeah, I'll go backwards. Chris went forwards in time. I'll go a little bit backwards. So I spent the last 6.5 years working at the Buckingham Company, which is an ADP company, helping clients use a researched evidence-based approach to help people do more better work, to show up at work as more as their own unique best self, and to help HR practitioners really shift not only their mindset, but their processes around how do we reliably, more real-time measure those really important things around people at work. Before that, I was an HR practitioner. I still consider myself a practitioner, but I worked for a large North American retailer with 130,000 employees, where I did HRIS, HR analytics, led a bunch of different talent functions for them. Before that, I was at a global tractor manufacturer. Before that, I was at an electrical distribution manufacturer. Before that, I was in academia. And before that, I was a chemical engineer.
Wow. So none of us planned on doing this for a living, it seems. Chemical engineer, no. salesman in music, and me was a dancer. We'll make a pretty good team, though, as well. How did the relationship happen between yourself, Steve, and the Buckingham Company? First of all, before we jump into that, what was the sort of challenge you guys were facing as an organization, and then how did this relationship come to life?
Sure. So before I joined Inspira, I knew of Marcus Buckingham. I knew of his books. I knew of the philosophy, but I didn't know that there was a full company around it. And when I joined Inspira, and we started really to look at what is the right fit, and I'll stand out, and TMBC really rose to the top over a few months. But going to that question of what was the challenge we were facing, I was in a fortunate position where when I was brought into Inspira, it was a new role. And the reason this role was created was really to drive the focus on talent, not simply HR operations, if you will. And so I was fortunate that our ownership, Kim and Jeff, they were 100% behind this people-focused philosophy. And so having familiarity with blog posts and books and things in the past, it was interesting to then open up to TMBC and really understand that it isn't simply, right, from a blog and book perspective, a strengths-based philosophy. There was this entire philosophy underneath and really at the top that helped to not only help people understand their strengths, but how do those apply at work? What's the appropriate or best practice way to be looking at the conversations that managers and employees should be having in order to make those most effective, leading to management, and how that plays into performance. So it was amazing that once you started to look under the hood, that it was actually something that is so different from what's at the surface.
Mm-hmm. Was you considering anyone else before you ended up partnering?
We did. So this is 3 years back, but we really looked all over the place. I remember starting with a list of about 20, right? And we had the big kahunas of that are out there that just the implementation costs are like millions of dollars.
Just that alone.
Right. But they have tried and true systems that span HR operations, performance, and everything out there, right? We looked at a few other more similar systems and processes to TMBC and Standout that were more the approach was more focused on the employee, the team member, and the team leader relationship, and really everything in between. But from a philosophy perspective, first and foremost, the first date, if you will, with the sales team and the project team at Standout, it was like, this is just the right fit. We're a people-focused organization. We put people ahead of the process. And that is really what is at the core, the nucleus of what TMBC is doing.
Mm-hmm. Amy, what is, in your words, sort of the difference then between what you're doing and the other sort of continuous performance management tools and companies out there, and what you do?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question because it's kind of confusing, and there's so many buzzwords out there around all these things that are new and kind of hot and very sexy, right? And we should all do continuous performance management. And the difference between that is really the separation of the measurement from the movement. There's this myth out there. I'm an engineer. We always used to say, what's measured gets done, what's measured gets managed. I mean, I think everybody says that. But really, that's a myth. That's not true. It's what's measured gets measured. So we separate the measurement of performance from getting more of it. So what's measured gets measured. And what Chris was talking, or what Steve has been talking about how to do that, is we know from the research and the data that the thing that moves the needle on engagement and performance is actually really frequent attention between team leaders and team members. It doesn't have to be high touch, it can be light touch, but really frequent attention about near-term future work through a strengths-based lens. So if you separate those two mechanisms, you measure for the organization so we can see into performance, and the movement happens where the work happens, which is on teams and the most important relationship between team leaders and team members. So continuous performance management doesn't even apply. We don't use data that we collect from those weekly conversations for anything other than to facilitate a really strong relationship between team leaders and team members. So it's a separation of those two, almost like work streams, honestly. So the difference is we focus on moving the needle very separately than how we measure it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it is really interesting from my seat, because when we start the conversation, it naturally starts and commonly starts with performance. And really what we've done is taken performance and not moved it to the side necessarily, but recognize that by focusing on things other than performance, especially from that measurement perspective, you get performance, right? So you focus on people's strengths, what drives them, what motivates them, what makes them want to do and be motivated to do better work, right? And if you give them that message alone, that's inspiring, let alone actually giving them a format to let them understand what that means and a lens to understand what that means. And to Amy's point about those weekly check-ins with their managers, you can go to most any company. Do your employees and managers check in weekly or bi-weekly, whatever their cadence is? Yeah, of course we do. You simplify it, And what comes out just by focusing on those two things alone are engagement and performance. So the challenge is that you want to start the conversation about performance, and you have a lot of us, and I will take ownership of this. When we want to talk about performance, all we want to hear about is performance. But by only talking and hearing about performance, we're missing an opportunity to actually shift performance in a bigger and better way.
Mm-hmm. Is that something you had to sit down and speak with the leadership team and get their buy-in on? Because obviously it's a big shift from traditional ways of looking at it.
The leadership team, I would say no. I was really, really fortunate that in coming in, the culture here is very positive focused, right? So one of our values is we're eternal optimists. So a strength-based philosophy, it was sold. Awesome. That makes sense. What I think the challenge was when I look at the broader leadership team was going right back to that. Why, if you're brought in to help us drive talent and performance, why are we talking about our weekly meetings, which we're already doing? Why are we talking about a new engagement survey? Why are we talking about this survey, an assessment, but a survey that everybody has to take? And so really focusing on the building blocks to it was an important part of the internal conversation, because inherently it is not as simple to some as, hey, we're rolling out a new performance process. It's this many questions, it's goals, it's ratings, boom, boom, right? You get it this month, we have a conversation this month, and we're done. There are more layers to it. So there is a little bit more complexity to it. But I tell you that once you understand it, and once you have that aha moment, and especially once you take the strengths-based survey, it's just like sold. And so that was an important part of that conversation, was letting people, before we were on board, if you will, with TMBC, was actually understanding their own profile and getting some insight into themselves, because it helps bring things to life.
Right. So before you worked together, did the leadership team do all of them complete the survey themselves?
We did. That was one of the first steps that we took, was understanding ourselves first. We had a number of people who had taken it previously, which was nice. Probably about 3/4 had not. But getting together and sharing about what your strengths are and how that translates to activities that make you feel strong, both inside and outside of work, starts to open up the conversation. And also, as a team, starts to understand, well before we even made the decision to roll out as a company, it helps us understand as peers, how can I better lean into you, one, to use your strengths, but also how can I be aware of where your strengths lie, so I can make sure that when we're working together, not only are you more effective, but you're more motivated. So right from the beginning, those conversations begin, and they change. It's hard to change the vernacular up front that quickly, but they definitely change the way that people start to look at each other. And that's a critical aspect of this conversation.
Yeah.
Hey, Chris, it might be helpful just for folks listening to kind of explain what it looks like in total.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
Because it's confused, like we know it because we live it every day. And
Yes.
It's just what we do. So kind of what the process looks like, if you will, or the approach looks like in practice, is all of our clients, every one of their employees starts their experience, I'm going to call it, or their with us, with a one-time 15-minute, we call it the standout assessment, but it's a strengths assessment. It's a situational judgment test to help you see how the best of you shows up to other people. And we use that, number one, it's super interesting because we all want to know more about ourselves, but we can also use it inside of our technology platform to help create a common language and to help curate content for team leaders and team members, and to give people conditional coaching tips. So you start this one-time assessment. And then what the software and the technology does is it's simply the support and sustainability tool, and facilitates that weekly light touch, we call it a check-in, that strengths-based conversation about near-term future work. It just creates, it operationalizes that. Because what we have found with our clients is if you don't have some sort of a built-in reminder system or a nudge system, it's not happening, as light touch as it is. So every week team members, all employees, get a little email that says, hey, it's time to check in, and you answer a couple quick questions, takes 3 to 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Your team leader sees that so they can have a super efficient conversation with you. And we give the team leader coaching tips based on your strengths assessment thing that you took that one time. So it's simply that. And then it just happens week after week. It's like a metronome. It just becomes how we do work. And as it turns out from our research, that's actually what the best leaders already do. It's that most of us are not the world's best leaders. So we operationalize that thing that the best leaders are already doing. And then we've got but generally quarterly. I think, do you guys do your engagement pulse quarterly, Steve?
We typically do, yes. So over the past few months, we've done it over the past 6 weeks.
We've got a short engagement pulse, which is awesome. Thank you for that. I think that's the right thing to do during disruption, is measure more frequently, not less frequently. That's an interesting thing to talk about. But a really super short 8-item engagement pulse. We call it engagement pulse. It's an engagement survey directed at team leaders. Team leaders get the data back. We can launch it centrally. But if engagement happens on teams, team leaders should be the ones who get that data back. And don't use it as a target, as an organizational target. It's a tool for team leaders because that's where it happens. And then we also have a really short, what we call performance pulse, which is really a measurement of employee performance, a view into people's performance. And that's really directed towards the organization and HR. It's not for team leaders. We gather the data from team leaders, but it goes to the organization and HR. So that notion, that question you asked before about continuous performance management, no, we're doing frequent enough performance measurement, and we're doing hyper frequent, radically frequent performance movement and performance acceleration.
Steve, go for it.
No, what I was going to say was it's looking at it from the practical perspective, right? When you hear what Amy says, and this is me 3.5 years ago, it was like, wait, we have to figure out and start to adapt what the best leaders do. And then when you hear what it is, it's 3 simple questions. It's, how are you doing? What are you doing? And what are you focusing on, I should say? And how can I help? But the aha moment in that very practical and sensible approach to management and leadership is that most often when you sit back and reflect on what you're talking with your team members about, you're actually very often leaving out 1, if not 2 of those questions. And it's amazing how quickly it evolves when you first lead with, how are you feeling? How are you? And then 2, making sure you explicitly ask, how can I help you? How can I support you? And it really just changes the entire feel of that conversation from the moment it gets put into the system, to Amy's point, but equally, and if not more important, when the actual conversation takes place. So it's almost intimidating to hear it's research-based and it's what the best leaders are doing. And it's like, oh, what the best leaders are doing really is not rocket science. We can do that. And it plays out amazingly well.
What's the feedback you're getting from your managers, right? Because they're the ones who are using this day in, day out. Because typically, as a manager myself in many organizations, we had similar tools that a lot of times were just a headache. What's the feedback that you got? Because initially, when I'm sure you rolled it out to all of the line managers, oh, here we go again, another new system tool that I have to make sure I complete and check in. Otherwise, HR is going to be on my back.
Well, and that is the truth. In 2017, it was new HR person, new HR system, new HR process. Like, what's next? But over time, it really completely has evolved. And I shouldn't even say over time, very quickly. Once people started to realize the value of the check-in, and really speaking to the team leader perspective, it becomes invaluable, right? We've talked a few times about data. And when we talk about performance data, when we talk about engagement data, right, when I look at my past, all of those were really focused at the company level and on a longitudinal and a smaller perspective, on a shorter perspective, if you will. Here, that is all, and Amy mentioned this, it's at the managers, the team leaders' fingertips right away. It gives them direct insight in terms of, on a weekly basis, their employee, was I able to use my strengths over the past week, and have I added value? And seeing that, not only for this week, it's an amazing insight in terms of the trends for an employee, right? And that's just the check-in. And to Amy's point with the engagement pulse, once we launch the first, and particularly the second, because you start to see trends, engagement pulse, again, once it's completed, it's not a process where HR needs to look at it and take 6 weeks. And I've been person, right, takes 6 weeks to figure out what it means, and then you roll out a process or a new program that was important 6 weeks ago, that's no more. Right here, as soon as the engagement pulse is done, it's at their fingertips. And I think that's the most critical piece of feedback that I've gotten. Yes, do some people get annoyed by a weekly process? Everybody gets annoyed by a weekly process, without question. But it's easy, it's simple, it's short, it's 5 minutes. So they focus on that, they learn that, and they're bought in. They look at the data that they have at their fingertips now and being able to look backwards. And in terms of how they lead their team and their individual team members, it's invaluable to them.
Yeah. How do
Hey,
you?
Steve, what did you guys? I'm sorry, Chris. You're the host. You should ask the questions, but I have a question.
No, go for it, Amy. Go for it. Go for it.
What did you guys stop doing, Steve? Like, did you stop some of those common HR processes that you did? Like, how do you create space to do this so that your managers aren't going, oh my gosh, like here comes, big evil HR people with one more thing for me to do. Here comes another box to check. Did you guys stop doing things?
We did stop doing a few things, right? So prior to our partnership with TMBC, when folks joined the company, they took 2 assessments, and adding a third was not an option, right? And so if this was going to be our strategic focus, those 2 moved out, if you will, and the standout strengths-based assessment, that was and is the focal point. That's it. So that's 1. 2 is from a performance perspective. Now, as a marketing organization and an experiential marketing organization with multiple clients, of course, we had multiple account teams with therefore multiple performance management processes. So, right, as a new HR person or an HR person, period, sometimes just coming into an organization understanding one performance management process is a challenge. Here it was either 5 or 6, and we needed to stop that and start this. And that was a really important line in the sand where we needed collective buy-in and to some extent, some conversations with not only internal folks, but also external folks in terms of this is going to be better, not only for our business, but also those who represent your brand. And it was a tremendously easy conversation with all those stakeholders in terms of how we shifted that. But to Amy's point earlier, there is that performance pulse. So we do something that we call a pulse check, which is a conversation. It removes the ratings, because when you actually take a step back and think about what value the ratings give to the employees and the managers, it's pretty much 0. There's not really value. Hey, Amy, you're a 4. Awesome, thanks. And we, during our trainings, we actually kind of play that out. Like, who are the numbers important to? And so instead, what we look at is the performance pulse. And to Amy's point earlier, that provides us with ongoing performance measurement data that helps to inform our business decisions. So those are the 2 key things that we really stopped doing. That the former assessments, but also a non-uniform is what I'll call it, performance management process.
Yeah, it's a really good question, Amy, because a lot of times the success of these things is actually not what you're adding, is actually what you're stopping. It's a really good question. Go for it.
No, the other thing that I'll add to that is, right, when we traditionally think about HR systems, bringing any new HR process or system in, it's not only the time of what happens when it actually works, it's the time and, let's be frank, headache of actually getting it up and running. And this was, we were told it would be really easy.
They all say that.
They do. They actually do.
In this case, terrible.
It was actually, it was really simple. So that there are these little things that, when you're looking at all the different decision-making factors, some of the other, options that we had, it was great. We can sign a deal now, but we're not ready for 6 months. Here, I want to say it was within 30 days, we could actually give employees something. And to Amy's point, the first thing that we are literally giving employees is that assessment. And it was just such a cool, disruptive change to be able to not only roll out an HR process, which to the points earlier, and we all know it, it's like, oh, here we go again, to the first step in this is actually giving something to you, not you giving something to us. And it really is a tremendous value when you're looking at bringing these type of things on board.
What impact has this had on engagement, Steve, since rolling it out? Did you measure it beforehand and measure it after to get a good gauge of where you were?
We did. The second step that we took, first step was that strengths assessment and helping people understand what their strengths were. Second step was a engagement pulse. And we were very fortunate. Inspira, in our 10+ year history, very people focused, heavily focused on culture, and that showed in our results, right? I remember our account team saying like, wow, you guys really you do things well. This is excellent. And at first it was, okay, so now how do we move it up? And it was, you're going to go through some change over the next few months. So let's at least first focus on keeping it flat. And so we saw some growth overall, but where we really saw growth was from our remote employees, right? Over 3/4 of our employees are remote from here in Connecticut, all across the US. Work from home, are out in the market, representing various brands. And it was those employees where, when we broke it apart, we really saw the step up, and it was creating connectivity, not only back here to our headquarters team, if you will, but also creating that rhythm of connectivity to their manager, further clarity in terms of what their priorities were on an ongoing basis. And that's really where we saw a huge difference. Now we continue to see, and it's interesting because you start to see the annual trends. We do, as Amy mentioned earlier, we do measure it quarterly. We do see annual trends where we see a peak at the beginning of the year when everything's like, yay, rah, let's go, 2020's ahead. And then we see a little bit of a valley, and then we see a peak up again. That also aligns with our business trends, right? So we're able to make sense of it. But what's been really interesting is, and I hope you don't mind me just kind of continuing on this route, is over the past 6 months, right? So we still had good engagement at the end of last year. At the end of February, we're kicking off 2020. A lot of great stuff going on for our business. And no joke, while we are at our company-wide offsite in late February, we get our first client call around how COVID is impacting our business, or our clients, I should say. And so the week following, we just so happened to have a engagement pulse. It was already scheduled, locked, loaded, sent. And now, fortunately, at that point, we still saw an increase, right? End of the year, beginning of the year, yay, rah, we're off to the races. And it was around then what we also realized, it was a few weeks later, that we actually shut down our offices. And we decided in partnership with TNBC that we're going to do this every 6 weeks. We need to focus on this a bit more. And we expected engagement to tank. We expected it to drop, just everything going on in the world, right? And what we saw was really interesting. All we did was return engagement back to where it was in December. We saw an increase, and it went back to what I would refer to as average or normal for us. So that was awesome, right? To be able to see that amidst what's going on right now was amazing. But digging a level deeper, what was really inspiring to me was that the highest driver, or the highest growth driver, we actually saw growth in some of the drivers during that time. And it was, my teammates have my back. Right, and just take a second and think about how important that is in right now, that another human being that I work closely with, and a group of us, we've got each other's back in this from a work perspective. And what we've also seen is that not necessarily engagement measurement, but just the conversations. We're literally in each other's homes. So it's been really great to see that not only over the past 3 years, but I think it's proven its biggest bulk of importance now, in terms of how, yes, we've moved the needle up. That's been awesome, but we've also been able to maintain that through arguably, and I think others would say, the toughest time in this company's history.
Yeah,
and the world's history, let's be fair, or the recent history.
Yeah, exactly. I was about to say,
Yeah.
in most people's, and I could definitely say in my life, it's been the toughest time I've ever had to go through, both professionally, personally, as well. And that's really, and thanks for sharing that. And those are really the things that count, that matter, that people remember. And it's great to see that that's the work you did beforehand has also helped you, right? Again, having those touch points with those people working remotely is now more important now than ever.
It is.
Right? You already have a system and process in place to stay connected with those leaders working remotely, whereas many organizations that I'm speaking to right now are scrambling to put something together and put something in place, whereas that was already part of your culture and part of your organization, which was, you couldn't have known how impactful that would have been going into it, right? And it was obviously the right thing to do anyway, as well. But I'm sure moving forward, as you continue to onboard people as we come out of this, it's going to be very, very valuable for you and everyone that works within the organization.
It is. And going back, I mean, as the head of people, that data is invaluable. And at least in some small way, it allowed me in that moment to say, wow, we as a group of people are doing some awesome things, and we're doing them right, even right now. But what I can say is also that when I look back at other instruments I've used, we would have never gotten that same level of insight. It would have been at the surface. How are we communicating? Those type of things, which, don't get me wrong, those are important. And I'm not trying to knock the other items that are out there, but those are surface level. Here we were actually, during an engagement pulse, and to Amy's point, 8 questions, quickly understand how people were feeling about themselves individually and us as a business. And that's just, for team leaders to have that is invaluable to them, to see exactly where they're at. So it allows us to make pivots and assessments in such real time, at I always say, the macro and the micro.
Yeah.
We actually saw that kind of as a general trend across our clients during COVID, during the pandemic and all the disruption, where, people keep asking, like, oh, did engagement go down? Did it plummet? And then when we look at our clients, it actually hasn't. It's stayed really steady. To your point, Steve, it's something that we see because that mechanism, that habit, that practice is already built into the organization of that frequent attention. I always call it, how do you have a culture of attention, a culture of high attention? And it was already there. And so we've seen lots and lots of stability, even with people, moving remotely. And you guys were already a lot of employees remote, but a lot of organizations, like with the, snap of the fingers, all of a sudden people are at home. And for them, that mechanism, that practice was already built in. It might have happened a little bit differently, or, it might have been over the phone via in person, or it might have been more text or what have you, but it was already there. And what we're hearing is that it was absolutely critical to having a smooth transition, at least in terms of the people relationship pieces and the teaminess pieces of work, from pre-COVID to in situ COVID, if you will.
Yeah. Steve, are there any other sort of best practice insights or tools that you've used in the last few months or years that you could share with our listeners to help them?
So over the past few years, I really want to go back to that, because really what we talked about at the beginning was performance is an output of this, if you will.
Yeah.
And it is. It without question is. But the way that we've been able to use that data has changed the landscape of how we've made business decisions, ranging from personnel decisions to compensation decisions. We have one common framework. So very often when you hear about a performance philosophy, it's then how does it inform all these decisions? And while it is somewhat of the backdrop to what we're talking about, that is there. It has shifted our annual processes, because we still do have annual processes. We are an organization where you still have those. And so all that data is at our fingertips, and it's more practical, it's easier. The other thing that I would add is that, and listen, I mentioned it in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way earlier, But when we talk about HR expenses, HR systems, we automatically think about huge dollar signs. That's what we've become accustomed to think. And what I can say here is that, right, for a company our size and just understanding in general the TMBC landscape, you're getting something of such great value for a very reasonable cost, right? To a point of, I remember writing back and saying, this is wrong. But it was right.
Just make sure they sign it and before they realize.
Yeah, and so one, that's wonderful. The other thing that allows you to do, and this is really important, that we did differently than a lot of TMBC's clients had done at that point, was we made an incremental investment in making 7 of our employees, a few members of our HR team, and a few members of our account teams, experts in standout, right? We ensured that 7 people were certified in how to engage or onboard, I should say, a team leader in this philosophy and approach, as well as to debrief team members when they took that assessment for the first time and walking them through, okay, great, I'm a creator equalizer. What does that mean? And what does that mean for me? And to me, us having internal experts and voices in this language has been an invaluable aspect. And to say that we did that in my first year, and now 2.5, 3 years later, that is a keystone to our culture. All of this is a keystone now to our culture is mind-blowing. It was completely disruptive. It was completely different than anything I had seen before. But both of those things, it was low barrier to entry. So we know that there are HR people out there that are listening, because I'm one of them, that say, oh, that's a great, huge idea for a company that has $1 million and millions and millions of dollars, I should say. For those of us who need something that is more approachable from a budgetary perspective, this is not only approachable from a budgetary perspective, it's super, super easy to grasp. And so I don't want that to sound like money should be the focus, but we all know, especially right now, that that's a really important conversation to be thinking of, in terms of how can I make these impacts on my business, knowing that as a world, right? As not just a US society, not just a UK society, all over the world, we're all thinking about doing what we can to tighten the purse strings a little bit. And it's an important, to say that you get tremendous value from TMBC and that we've gotten a tremendous value is the understatement of the year. I mean, so I think it's important for folks to know as they're considering what's out there. There's something out there for every company, and it doesn't have to be the cheap version.
How much are they paying you, Steve, for this?
Nothing. They really aren't.
I said, this isn't a stand-up commercial. Like, we're just talking. Like, it doesn't have to be a commercial. So thank you for this.
No, I'm just joking. I know Steve's very genuine
about what we do. I appreciate it.
And that, Amy, to be fair, as I'm saying this, that is in the back of my head. But if I were on the other side of this conversation as a listener, that would be my assumption is, cool, Marcus Buckingham, he's expensive. And sorry. So I think it's really important to let people know that there are solutions that are innovative, that are able to make a huge impact, that are able to shift the culture, but they're approachable for small and medium-sized businesses. And because not a lot of them exist. They don't.
Yeah. No, and I was making a joke, but I really appreciate it. And that's why when we started this show and I first spoke with Amy and the team, for me, it's always important to hear from the client, from the practitioners. Because at the end of the day, everyone's going to say their product's great, solution, it's cost effective, easy to implement. But for everyone listening right now, it's always about, who's the person sitting there putting out the fires on a daily basis, having to implement this and living in the business, breathing the business as well. So I know you mean that, otherwise you wouldn't come on the show.
Absolutely.
But before we wrap up, for both yourself, Amy, and Steve, is this sort of a parting message for everyone? What would that be? And also, where's the best, Steve, if there's other practitioners that want to have a chat with you, learn more, where can they reach you? And similar for yourself, Amy. I'll start with you, Steve. I'll pick on you first.
Excellent. So parting message is that, as an HR person, and I've again been in sales and operations and have spent about 12 years in the HR world. We are taught that there is a way to do things, and when we are invited or see an open door to change and shift, we often skew back to what we've been taught for years. And I don't say just us for years, us as an industry for years. And change is possible, and change is awesome. The things that we have been able to do are so critical. And it's really finding the right partner to help tell that story with you. And I think that's a super important aspect to this is, when you're thinking about changing from the old tried and true performance management and engagement processes, dip your toe in the water with a conversation and bring an expert to the table, because that's what really helps you change a vernacular that we've been trained on, accustomed to for our entire careers, and arguably since World War II, but that's a whole different podcast. And ways to reach out to me. I would love to hear from folks. I'm on LinkedIn. That is always the best way. I do my best to respond to messages on a regular basis. So LinkedIn is absolutely the best way to reach out. And I would love to hear from folks around the world.
Amy?
Yeah, first of all, the title of this is How Inspira Took a Bold Step Towards Innovation in Their HR. And I think the key word is bold. And I see this so often with practitioners. I saw it in myself, quite frankly, as a practitioner, is being scared, to your point, Steve, is being a little bit scared and nervous. Like, really? Like, can we really take all of those things that we've been taught and we've read the books about and really kind of throw them out and take a common sense approach to helping people be more better at work, helping our employees do more of their own unique best work? And the answer is yes. And I think Steve is such a wonderful example of a really bold HR leader who leaned into research and leaned into common sense and turned it into common practice. And you've changed the culture of your organization. I mean, it feels different than it did when I first talked to Inspira, maybe like it was before you were there. I think it was like 4 years ago.
Yep.
And anybody can do this. Like, any leader can do this. You just have to be bold and have a little bit of courage. And the end result of it is why we all got into HR in the first place, which is, how do we make work better? And how do we deliver better results and more value to our organizations and our shareholders if we happen to have them? And the only way to do that is through your employees. And Steve has done that, and done it beautifully and simply, and in a way that has changed their organization.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Amy.
I'll do that.
Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate you both joining me on the show. I knew we were going to have fun, and we certainly did. I really appreciate that. Amy, in terms of for everyone to check out yourself, LinkedIn as well, and if they want to learn more about the Marcus Buckingham Company, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, absolutely. LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me. I do almost every Thursday, I do a little Thursday Think About if you want to read something super interesting. And to learn more about TNBC, it's tnbc.com.
Perfect. Well, look, enjoy the rest of your days, guys. And I look forward to chatting with you again soon. For everyone on LinkedIn, thank you for joining us. I'm sure Steve and Amy will get back to you on all the questions. Sorry we didn't get time. I didn't realize it's already 45 minutes. Sorry we didn't get time to go through your questions. I'll send them over there after. And we'll see you all again tomorrow. But thanks a lot again, Amy, Steve. See you soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Bye.
Thank you, Chris.